Great. Okay, thank you, Hannah. Good evening, everybody. My name's Steve Tanner. I'm the chair this evening for this meeting. You're all very welcome, wherever you are, at here in the town hall or online, to the meeting of Frome Town Council Planning Committee. We want to make our council and committee meetings available to as many people as possible, regardless of where they are, virtually or in person. We also need to make sure that those that attend the meeting here in the council chamber are as safe as possible. We're still getting used to having meetings like this, and people on both in person and in Zooming in. So please bear with us if it feels a little bit crunchy at times. These hybrid meetings will technically be informal because the government has not brought forward legislation to enable us to continue to operate virtually, but we will run them as if they were formal. They have been advertised, and as you can see, we still have agendas, reports, discussion and votes, and minutes will be taken. Legally, only the councillors present in person will be able to vote, which is a bit exclusive and unsatisfactory. So to ensure all councillors can vote, we will have to delegate to our clerk, Jane, to carry out the informal decisions made by the councillors tonight. Otherwise, we'll be running the meeting in the usual way with everybody chipping them in as we go along. So the meeting has started, and I would like to propose that Jane, who is clerking this meeting, has delegated authority to implement the informal decisions this committee makes tonight. Do I have a seconder from councillors in the room tonight, please? Thank you, Sheila. We vote on that. All those in favour? Great. That's passed unanimously. That's the legal stuff out of the way. Now down to the meeting. As ever, we are live streaming this via our YouTube channel. All participants, both town council and staff, please mute yourself until I ask you to speak. And please raise either your electronic blue hand or wave so that I or Jane or Hannah can see you clearly. The votes will be recorded by Jane as ever. And please forgive me if we need to end the discussion and go to a vote if time is short and we're overrun. We have 2 attendees, I think, this evening. Good evening, you're all very welcome. Again, can I please ask you to pose questions to your Q&A board, or we'll allow you to join at the right time. For those in the room, please raise your hand in a normal way. As ever, we always say this, that the meetings that we conduct are safe space meetings. Please respect other people's opinions. And do bear in mind that anything you may say may affect the emotions and feelings of others. We like to have our council meetings as inclusive, and we do encourage debate. So, without further ado, first item on the agenda, questions, comments from public and councillors, not regarding anything that we're talking about later. Any questions? No, great. Apologies for absence and declarations of members' interest. I've got an apology from Maxine, Hannah.
Yeah, that's the only apology.
That's the only apology. Thanks very much. And are there any declarations of members' interests? Rich? Right, that's number 590.
603, 604, the Crown at Keyford, close personal friendship with applicant.
Great. Thank you very much. Any others? No. Item number 3 on the agenda, to agree the minutes of the meeting held 3rd of June 2021. I have the minutes here. I'm sure council have all read them. If I could get someone to propose those, please. Thank you, Mark. Someone a second. We want you to. Thanks, Sheila. And all those in favour.
And that's unanimous.
Great. And I've signed them and I'll pass those over to Hannah. Thank you, Jane.
But do you okay? Is the link working? Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry.
Okay. Yeah, just. And just bear with us a minute. One of the councillors in the room is just having trouble logging in. I'll be with you in 1 minute.
You're in.
You're in.
act as panelists as well.
Great. Item number 4 on the agenda, to consider the major plan applications received. At this point, I shall pass over to Jane.
Thank you. So the first application that we are going to discuss is number 590 on our list, and it's land adjacent to the retreat Froome. The application description is for the erection of an employment studio building and 4 dwellings with associated highway and landscaping works. This application is the resubmission of a previous application that you'll recall that is currently at appeal. There are a few very small differences to the application plans, but I think the main difference is that this application includes reference to providing a permissive path to the river. And sorry, a message just flashed up on my screen from Chris Beaver, who I was going to ask Hannah if she could make into a panelist.
Yeah, just raise him now.
Just while that's happening, for councillors' information, we did object to the previous application, and you'll see in the notes that I sent through that I actually copied that objection in full at the bottom of the notes. I won't read through it now because it was actually quite lengthy, but that's just to act as a reminder of what we'd said previously. And I can see that Chris has now joined us, and I had asked him in advance of the meeting if he'd be happy to talk through the application for us. So hopefully that's still the case.
Good evening,
Yeah.
Chris.
Yeah, good evening. Yeah, thank you, Jane. Do you want me to do a screen share just to bring a plan up, or am I able to do that?
You should be able to do that, and if that helps to talk through it, then yes, that'd be great.
Okay, just bear with me a second.
Oh, Hannah's just changing you over to a host.
Oh,
co-host.
okay. I'll wait till I've got clearance on that. Yeah.
It should work now. It should give you the option.
Okay. Let me just try and do that, and then
Okay, just while you're doing that, I've got a question from Councillor.
Hang on.
Yeah, it's not a question, it's just a declaration, because I've met Chris and the developers a few times discussing the path. I'm also met with friends of the film. So just for openness sake, and so that there's no accusation of predeterminism or favoritism. I'm not going to vote in this, but I'm happy to answer questions.
Great, thank you. I would also say we've got Simon Keys here from Friends of the River Froome, who also would like to speak as well at some point. So Simon, we'll bring you in at the right time if that's okay.
okay. Do you want me to say a few words?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you, Froome Town Council, for giving me an opportunity to speak. I think it's just worth. I'm Chris Beaver, planning consultant, acting for the owners of the retreat, and in fact, we also acted for the previous owners, the Moors, and got the original planning permission that was granted in September 2018. So that permission is still extant, and in actual fact is subject to a variation application, because one of the reasons that the previous scheme, the one that was similar to the one in front of you today, which is now at appeal, that was reported to the planning board at Mendip with an officer's recommendation for permission. The members decided to defer it, but only on grounds that the buildings that were on the site were demolished. There was a good explanation for why they were demolished, because it was necessary to take them down to do the site investigation. So just to sort of set the record straight on that, the variation application, which is reference 2021-0660, is still under consideration by Mendip District Council, and that is seeking to regularise the demolition of the buildings because it was done out of sequence. So the point of raising that is that that effectively deals with the reason for deferral of the previously the original scheme that we submitted on behalf of the current applicants. But on the advice of the planning case officer, it was quite clear that that wasn't going to be reported back to committee, so we had no choice but to appeal it against non-determination. Subsequent to that, there were discussions with the Friends of River Froome, as has been alluded to by the other speakers and councillors, and that informed the scheme that's before you this evening, which is exactly the same red line as the previous scheme and indeed the extant scheme. The only difference being is that the plot 4 has been, the siting of it, which I'll just put on my cursor here, has been moved, and there's a garage block being introduced, and this has been designed to make provision for a sort of upper footpath around here, which could facilitate an agreed sort of compromise solution in relation to the sort of footpath matter. And the putative footpath, just for everybody's reference, is annotated in yellow on the plan along here. So this is the footpath that you'll recall that is the subject of the Somerset County Council process, which is a separate process outside the planning application. You can see it's actually outside the red line of the application site. And Mendip, the planning officers at Mendip and the legal advisors have not conflated the two issues, and that's why they recommended the previous application for permission, and indeed Mendip granted the original application. So the purpose of this revised application is to facilitate a potential new permissive path that could go on the upper part of the site and then join back in to the River Froome further along. And that is the subject of informal discussions, and in association with that, there's also the potential for some of this land further this way, beyond the red line of the site, to potentially be sold to Froome Town Council for future management. So from our perspective, the scheme that was recommended for permission before is ostensibly the same in planning terms, but the main difference being that it would facilitate an agreed solution, and part of that agreement, if this alternative solution is agreed, part of that deal would be the withdrawal of the current Somerset process. However, notwithstanding all that, we feel that on its own planning merits, and certainly the Mendip officers and their legal advisors think the same, is that there is no reason why this scheme should not be determined and a decision made on it. And we've effectively, as I said, addressed the reason for deferral, which was nothing to do with the footpath, just the demolition of the outbuildings. So that's been addressed in the Section 73 application. So from the applicant's perspective, if this application that's on the table here is permitted, they will then withdraw the appeal, and this will be the scheme that will go forward. So I think I'll leave it there for now. I suppose actually there's just one other point I wanted to make. The applicants have been, there is a sort of sense from the applicants' discussions with some of the occupiers of the retreat that they feel this process has sort of gone on long enough, and the feedback we're receiving is that a number of the residents of the retreat are quite supportive of this potential alternative solution, and they're as keen as anyone else to see this whole matter brought to a conclusion. So I think I'll leave it there for now. I'm happy to leave the plan on the screen and take any questions as appropriate.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks so much for that, Chris. Simon, would you like to speak now?
If you sit there, that little thing is a microphone. So if you can Or there, that one. I'm not sure if that microphone is on though.
The little box is a microphone. Simon. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for allowing me to speak. Thank you, Speaker, for clarifying some of the issues there. Friends of River Froome, with some regret, continues to object to this application. I'd like to explain why. It's obvious that the developers wish to achieve a situation where the gardens of the new houses extend out. They've made that abundantly clear by asking us, for instance, to withdraw our DMMO application. And the suggestion of an alternative, at the moment completely hypothetical alternative, is another indication. I think that is their intent. That is unacceptable for two reasons. First of all, this would reduce access to the river corridor, if this were the case. And this is in direct contradiction to both the neighbourhood and the local plan, and of course the Froome River strategy, which you've agreed. The second is that the path is not, as Christina described it, putative. It is a path that actually exists already. It's on the 1 to 2,500 ordnance survey map. There's no dispute about that. The question is about right of access.
Correct.
We have right of access to the path on the basis that it's being used for generations, and we can document that fact. So under the 1980 Highways Act, we have prescribed access to the path already. So the question is about whether it will become a public right of way or not. We've provided evidence to Somerset County Council, and we have a lot more evidence that we've gathered since. So that if we are forced to go down the route of relying on the DMMO, then there's a lot more evidence from residents of Froome to demonstrate that this is a well-used, long-standing path, which very likely decided the right of way. The problem we have here is that you'll see from the red lines on the map there that the footpath has been excluded from the site plan. This hinders proper consideration of this development, in my opinion, because the impact of the potential changes to future changes to the development and the impact on the path cannot be considered because of the way this red line is drawn. I think it's a clever strategy, but it's at the heart of this lengthy dispute, which everyone, I'm sure, Barney and Peter and Chris and everyone else are getting fed up with this. Well, we're also getting fed up with it too. But we're not going to allow that to interfere with our decision. Now, one thing I am advised, I'm not a planning specialist, but I am told there are some precedents for what I understand is called consequential impact being a material consideration in a planning decision. So if as the developers now seem fairly freely open to admit it is their intention to remove the path, then that could be considered as a consequential impact of this planning application. So I don't want to take more of your time, but I just wanted to say where I think we might go from here. If the developers were able to give us a concrete assurance that they are not intending to remove the path or to extend the gardens over the existing path line, all these problems would go away. However, if they're not prepared to do that, then my recommendation is that Froome Town Council opposes this application on the same basis that objects to it, on the same basis that the Friends of River Froome. But it will, the impact of the scheme will be to reduce access to the riverside path. If we have to go down the DMMO route, our application was lodged before the developers came on the scene. And it may take some years before it's decided. There's a 20-year backlog in Somerset at the moment. So it may well take some time before a decision is made whether this is the right way or not. And the developers have told us that if it is decided, they will appeal against it. So this could go on and on and on for 30 years. And this will just develop, this will just continue the uncertainty and disharmony that is a really unfortunate aspect of this whole affair. Nobody wants that. So I was pleased to see the willingness of the developers to provide an alternative rerouting. This is a notional idea at the moment, not something you should take account of in your decision on this application, in my opinion. But whilst we recognise the value of that compromise proposal, it's not acceptable as it stands, for the very simple reason that why on earth should we give up the prospect of a proper right-of-way along the riverside in return for a permissive path that could be withdrawn at any stage? So they can't possibly expect people to agree to that. So what I'm saying to from Town Council is, if you feel the developers' intentions are not being honestly put forward here, and that at some point the path will be removed, then I think you should object to the scheme. Alternatively, I don't know whether you are able to attach conditions to your decisions here, but you could suggest that you would agree with the scheme itself. And I should say, Friends of Brimfield has no problem with the scheme itself. You know, it seems a nice piece of architecture. But you could attach a condition that that the question of the right of way and a possible alternative right of way should be agreed before work starts, and it should be negotiated to meet the various concerns of Crewe Town Council, the local environmental organisations, Friends of Brimfield, and so forth. So you could attach that condition. The other thing I would really like to ask Crewe Town Council to do is, would you broker conversation directly with the developer on this? There have been a lot of communication problems. It's been very difficult to have this conversation. And we are reasonable people, and I think most people in the room would want to put an end to all the angst about this and try and find a constructive way forward that will meet both our needs. But it has to be firm, it has to be a right of way, and it has to be there has to be an incentive, a strong incentive for people in Crewe to give up the path, you know, that is much valued as the walk for years. I believe a compromise is possible, but I ask Crewe Town Council to be active brokers in a new conversation with the developers. Thank you.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks for that. Can I throw this open to questions from councillors or members of the public now?
John's got his hand up.
I've got John first, then Mark.
Mine. Okay, so my question is mostly technical. It's just a technical clarification. Does one thing preclude the other? So the red line of the boundary of the development, etc., that does not preclude that path still existing, nor does the path still existing theoretically impact upon the development as proposed, correct? I just want to be clear on that if the development support that's going to be extinguished automatically, one thing does not preclude another. That's all. Thank you.
Well, from an applicant perspective, that is correct. Absolutely. And I think the point around the gardens is that the gardens are defined by the red line on the plan. So if the gardens were to be extended beyond that, it would require a further planning application. So that it's entirely contained by the red line, which is exactly the same red line as the scheme that was approved. So the principle of development, residential development on this site, is established. One just minor point of correction: the Ordnance Survey annotation on the map was an error, and the latest edition of the Ordnance Survey, the putative path, as I like to call it, isn't on the latest edition of the Ordnance Survey.
But does that suggest that those plots, the ownership extends all the way down to the river from those plots, or just stop at the red line?
The red line denotes the extent of the proposed residential curtilage. So if irrespective of ownership, if this permission was permitted and implemented, the occupiers of those houses would only be able to use the land as garden, which is within the red line. If they were to use anything outside the red line as domestic curtilage, a further planning application would be required.
Okay, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Mark, and then I see Rob.
Yeah, good evening, Mr. Beaver. Permissive path, certainly something I've recently found out about. That is a path that you are allowing to run through your ground, but the permission can be removed at any time, is that correct?
I'm not a footpath expert, but I believe you're correct. But I mean, I think in terms of what's been discussed, we're sort of potentially talking about if Frome Town Council take over the land beyond, that would become a permanent safeguarded sort of a footpath, you know, so it could become a right of way under the deal that's being discussed.
But the path being permissive is running through the applicant's property.
Yes.
And they can put a gate there if they wish to and cut it off. And so I think people would have to be nervous around thinking that we would do a deal to do the permissive path and give up the right of way application when that can be removed at any time.
Yeah, I mean, the applicants aren't here tonight, but I'm pretty certain that the intention is for it to become a permanent full right of access, you know, if this deal is done.
Yeah, but intentions probably aren't enough. It probably needs a bit more than that.
Yeah, that would be worked out. I mean, there's quite a lot of sort of environmental and management issues, you know, maintenance issues, you know, litter retrieval, all that sort of stuff. So as when we discussed it with Frome Town Council, you know, it's very apparent that, you know, things like insurances and all the rest of it. So it is a complex sort of proposition, really, and it can't be solved here tonight. But but there's willingness to discuss these things.
Thank you.
Thanks, thanks, Mark. I've got Paul next, and then Jamie.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Yeah, thank you. It's Chris, isn't it? Sorry.
Yeah.
Thanks for your clarification of John's question. I just wanted to kind of take that a little bit further, really. The existing footpath, as shown in yellow on your plan, is, as you clearly pointed out and confirmed, that it's outside the development boundary of the planning application. Can you also then confirm that the developers or the owners have no plans to remove that footpath in the future?
Well, I think we don't actually agree that it is a footpath. I think that's the other thing that I should say. I mean, they have put legal submissions into the Somerset process. I know that the Frome, River Frome is very confident of their position, but I would say that equally the applicant and their legal advisors are very confident of their position. And so we do not accept that it is a footpath. And, you know, that's something that if we can't reach a compromise, that Somerset County Council will have to adjudicate on. But so I think that's our sort of position on that, and that's what the applicant's legal submissions are into that process.
Can I just, do you mind if I ask?
Having said that, as a goodwill gesture, they have recently taken down the sort of barriers that the previous landowner erected on the site as a goodwill gesture while these negotiations are going on. So the actual site is now more accessible than it has been in recent years, because as a goodwill gesture, they took away and made it easier for people to access it, and people are allowed to go on there at their own risk. But the applicants, in doing so, have done that on a sort of without prejudice basis to the position they've stated in the Somerset process.
Yeah, great. That's much appreciated. If I can just come back slightly on, it seems to me that, I mean, obviously, the Friends of the River Frome are calling for a compromise and a discussion about this, and I wonder. It seems to me that with the permissive path, that seems to be a very positive contribution. However, rather than Friends of the River Frome withdrawing their application for a public right of way, if we also allowed Somerset County Council to determine that in due course, which may, as Simon says, may take 20 years, if we allow Somerset County Council to determine that, and meanwhile have the permissive path as well, that seems like a very, very satisfactory compromise to me, or maybe it's not a compromise in your mind. But
Yeah, I mean, I to be honest with you, I don't think it would be an acceptable outcome for the applicants, because obviously they've got to raise the capital to do the development, and that level of sort of uncertainty for future occupiers of the houses and things, would create problems. So I think the idea of the compromise is to find a solution once and for all now and remove all future uncertainty. So that's the whole point, really, of offering the compromise, because there's no guarantee that the Friends of River Frome will win the Somerset case. We don't know. None of us know what the outcome of that is. So this is giving something. Appreciate it's not what everybody wants, but it's at the moment, the status of that path hasn't been determined.
okay, thanks.
Jane?
Thank you. Sorry, forgot I was actually in the chamber and unmuted. I apologise. My question is actually for Simon. If the path, or the proposed permissive path, was actually a right of way and was clearly shown on a plan so that it could be conditioned or even dealt with through a Section 106 legal agreement, and therefore there was no possibility that the right of access across it could be taken away by either the current owners or any future owners, would that be more acceptable to Friends of the River Frome and the residents? Would that be a solution? I appreciate that doesn't deal with the issue of the application to Somerset County Council being removed, but it seems to me that there are, where we are at the moment is uncertainty. Yeah. And by making it a right of way, clearly showing it on the plans, that would at least take that element of uncertainty away. Would that be more acceptable?
If it was determined to be a right of way sooner rather than later.
So if the permissive path that's being talked about through the site, if that was actually a right of way or a footpath with or access rights over it, rather than just being permissive.
Yes, like Chris Beaver, I'm not an expert on paths, but I think there is a very big difference between a permissive path and a right of way.
Yeah.
A right of way becomes a statutory right in English law to have access to that, irrespective of the landowner's permission or not.
Yeah.
A permissive path, by definition, is out of permission.
Yeah.
And can be withdrawn at any time.
Yeah.
It's worth saying, I just want to saving your presence, Chris, just say that I think I understand the use of the path slightly differently. That the path does exist. It is on the 1 to 2,500 map. It's not marked as a public right of way. It was accident. Strangely enough, I don't know how this came back, but for a weird period of 6 months last year, it was indicated as a right of way. Nobody knows how that happened. We think there might have been a road member or something like that. They can't anyway. But so we said it's not marked as a right of way, but it does exist on the map as a path. And because of we can document its history of use, we therefore have prescribed access rights to walk it. So it's not just a potential path, it is a path that actually exists. But what we don't have at the moment is defined as a public right of way. So it's sort of in a strange area between those two things.
Yeah.
But it's not true to say the path doesn't exist. The path exists and we have the right to.
Well, I've been walking it for 30 years.
Thanks. Sheila, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm feeling like anyway, I don't understand. There's the defined red line area that is development. The path or the area, the part that runs near the river, that seems to be outside that area. And the path that you're suggesting, Chris, is Okay, because inside the area. And so, I don't understand why there's a problem, really, because the path by the river is not within the development. Why do you object to it? It's, you know, the buildings can't go with it and the gardens can't go down to the river. And yeah, so is it the yellow line, I assume, is the path that we're talking about here? Is that right?
Yes, the yellow is the putative public right of way.
Okay, it's the area that Simon said it's been used for a considerable number of years. And then the permissive area that you're suggesting is running along the top of the site.
Correct.
What's the problem with using that yellow path that runs by the river? It's not in your development. The land is presumably part of somebody else's land.
No, it's owned by the applicant, so it's in the blue line.
So the blue line is owned by the applicant as well. It's just the development. Yeah. Right. Okay. That explains it. Thank you. So what? Yes. Okay. So I must admit, I like the idea of having something that's actually very definite, which is what I think Jane was explaining. That seems to give some, give what Friends of the River Cruise wants, which is certainty. And I think this part always sounds like you could take the permission away, which doesn't sound to me like we're going.
I mean, the intention is if the deal is done, that becomes a permanent public right of way along the top. But the only way the applicants will agree to that is if the Somerset County Council process is withdrawn. So if the land transfer and the all the sort of management and everything is agreed through negotiation, then a public right of way can be formed through the site. So at this stage, while there's still a path, the putative public right of way, that process is still live, it's offered as a permissive right of way. But if the parties can reach a deal, then the public right of way would be established on the upper part of the site. So that's the proposition. This planning application is designed to facilitate that, but our position all along, and including as was accepted when Mendip District Council granted planning permission for the previous scheme, is that the two processes should not be conflated. There is no reason why this application should not be determined. If the parties can then subsequently come to an agreement, then the separate footpath, which is being dealt with by a different council, that matter can be addressed in due course. But if the parties can't agree, then we'll all have to wait for the outcome at Somerset County Council.
We've got Lizzie and then Jane.
Thanks, Steve. Jane, or Hannah, could you pop that picture back up, because it's helpful, I think. First of all, I wanted to really express gratitude from listening to both Chris and Simon about the willingness and the things we have in common, the shared frustration about how long this has taken, and that this has been, quite combative at various points. And actually the fact that both parties are saying, we really want to make this, we want to make something work. I think that's really good and really positive foundation. And I hope we can help, as the Town Council can help in moving that forward. Could you clarify for me the bit you're talking about as permanent path along the top? That's where it says, where it's in the sort of peachy colour, just
That's
along
correct.
the top.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly
So
right.
that's permanent path along the top, which then on a diagram that I see then would loop down towards the river.
Yeah, as a route to be negotiated.
Yeah. So what happens to, let us call it the yellow line, heading off
Yes,
to the right, where currently
the right.
the back gardens, shall we say?
Yeah, so that effectively becomes private land, which would be managed by a private management company, but it wouldn't be used as garden land. And there's a good reason for that, because there's a requirement for Environment Agency access on there to maintain river. So there's a sort of 8 metre buffer that you have to leave for that Environment Agency maintenance. So the private gardens are contained within the red line.
Sure. Okay.
And then that area becomes the responsibility of a private management company, which would be owned by the residents and the commercial operator of the employment units. So that gets managed appropriately. But if the deal that's being talked about comes forward, then that yellow line would disappear. But there would be in its place a permanent footpath on the upper part of the site, which would then work through and connect to the riverside, and at a point to be agreed. And then the other element of the equation would be potentially Frome Town Council to purchase that land to use as a wildlife or nature reserve, in accordance with a plan to be agreed. So that's the sort of broad proposition. But really the applicant will only, there'd be a lot of discussions and talks that would be required, because there's a lot of complications around that process. But the key thing from the applicant's perspective is to get this planning sorted out, to remove that uncertainty, so that those other discussions can take place. And then if agreement can't be reached, then everybody falls back on the status quo.
Thank you for clarifying that for me. And I was getting confused about permissives and putatives. So
yes,
the bit along the top and the yellow line are kind of language I can get hold of.
Yeah.
I was interested in Jane's comment earlier about Section 106 agreements and whether something could be put in place which would kind of give the assurances that people are seeking in the short term, but give longer term assurances as well, in the absence of any decision from Somerset. I was also wondering if there are imaginative things that could be done about putting the land, or putting some of the land or the access in trust, or in the trust of, or in the care of a third party, be that Frome Town Council, or be that one of the other trusts that owns and manages quite a lot of the parklands and green spaces in Frome. And I don't know if that's something that could be thrown into the mix. I also am not a planner or a lawyer, so I'm probably coming up with things that are completely unfeasible, but I think it's all good fodder for the discussion. And I'd be interested in if there is, Jane, from a planning perspective, those sorts of approaches, if that could be a route for the assurance that people are seeking.
It could be. Was it me next, or was somebody?
It was you.
It was me next. It was me next. So I'll carry on. So I think Chris was saying that the reason for the application being submitted was that was to enable discussion to take place.
Yeah, so this application, that's right, it will facilitate the upper route and those things that we've spoken about, but it's not possible to resolve all the full detail of that. So what really we need is the planning permission. And I think in respect to the Section 106, that I believe that would be problematic, because you actually have to have a land use sort of planning reason for a Section 106, and it has to meet what we call the SIL Regulation 122 tests. And I think the Mendip planners would probably agree that it wouldn't be appropriate. I mean, what you've got to remember is that the Mendip District Council have already granted planning permission for another scheme. So to treat this one any differently is highly problematic in planning terms, because there is an extant scheme for residential. All we're seeking to do is to put a different scheme on the table. But the other difference is that this scheme enables these future discussions to work through, because it's in mutual interest to try and reach agreement.
So my point was going to be that as this application has been submitted to facilitate discussion, there is a possibility that the application that is currently appealed could be approved by the inspector.
That's correct. Yeah.
If that happens, then there simply won't be any more compromise or discussion around the path. Would that be the case?
Right. I'm glad you raised that, Jane, because the applicants have said that if this scheme is permitted, then the appeal will be withdrawn. So this will be the only one left on the table. So that scheme will be removed from the equation.
But if no compromise can be reached during the process of this application,
Yeah.
and in the meantime the appeal gets allowed, then that.
Not necessarily. I mean, I think if this application doesn't get determined or is refused, then it would be joined up with the other application, and we would probably have a co-joined appeal. So, but conversely, if this application is approved, then the applicants have given both Mendip and and I'm saying here tonight that the appeal would be withdrawn. So, and that gets taken off the table.
Thank you. And in terms of the section 106, I suppose I was just thinking about that as some kind of a legal agreement, but potentially, if there is that degree of certainty that's being looked for, there are other legal agreements outside of the planning process.
Absolutely, and that would be one that the applicants would, consider discussing absolutely as part of those discussions. So they're definitely open to that. Absolutely.
But I do believe that in order for that to happen, that the path, I know perhaps the route hasn't been agreed, and I've heard everything you've said, but I really do think that the path has to be shown clearly on a plan that accompanies the planning application before any of that can happen. But that's my opinion. So.
Yeah, I mean, I take a different view, because planning permissions, there is already an extant planning permission on the site, and so the principle has been accepted. So so I think we'd have to agree to disagree on that point.
Paul, over to Paul.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it sounds to me like we're actually making some progress with negotiation and conversation here. So I think that seems to be positive. I mean, there's obviously still quite a lot to be resolved. But I just wanted to, just for the sake of clarity, if anything, I'd just like to ask, I probably know the answer, why the applicant has a problem with the yellow line as it is. Is it purely because it's going to reduce the value of their properties?
I mean, it is. I mean, it's not only reducing the value, it could reduce the saleability of the properties as well. So and that's what agents have advised the applicants. So so essentially the applicant's position is that footpath, they believe that the Somerset County Council application will fail, and so there's a sort of and they don't view the footpath in the same way as that others do. But yes, you're right. It's the it will make the sale of those properties more problematic.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, it's about money, and ultimately, I guess, isn't it?
Well, they've got to raise the finance to develop the sites, and they've got to be confident that they can actually sell the houses.
Right.
So that's the difficulty.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Thanks, Paul. I'm just going to ask Chris something actually. In our neighbourhood plan, Chris, we basically promised to protect the river walkway. If we were to agree to this proposal, we would effectively be saying that the yellow path has gone, and we agree that there is a permissive path, which I think everybody agrees is something that your client can remove at a whim. Therefore, it sort of goes against our neighbourhood our neighbourhood plan at the end of the day. And if the applicant's legal team are so convinced that the yellow path will fail, then why are they so keen for it to be withdrawn?
It's because of the timing. It's the, you know, because of the time it's going to take to come to inquiry. I mean, if it was going to be happening in the next 6 months or so, then, you know, then it can run its course. But it's just as they've got such a backlog of cases, and it's that timing uncertainty. But I think I would say to you that they're already, as I said, there's already a planning permission on the site. If this application is approved in the absence of a deal that's done between the parties that withdraws the application still goes ahead. So there's nothing materially changes about the status of that footpath in the granting of this permission, because they're sort of mutually exclusive. The red line does not encroach on that yellow line. And if a deal can't be done, then it will just have to follow due process. And it will either become a public right of way or it won't. This planning application has no bearing on that because it doesn't fetter that yellow line. So, so I think because they are two distinct processes. All this application does is offer a route out through negotiation. So that's the difference between this application and the previous one.
Okay.
Shall I stop sharing now?
Yeah.
No, I can't because I'm sharing my screen. I can't see anything.
Do you want to bring Helen in? I think she's, yeah. Okay, Helen. Hello, Helen.
Oh, hello. Hello, everybody. Hi, I'm the ward councillor, and I'm obviously interested to see how this all pans out. I suppose that for me, just looking at it from the outside, I have not been very involved in the campaign. I've unlike my co-ward councillor who has. I suppose what I want to see is a path of some sort. And my concern is that it is a path in that we can keep in perpetuity. Sorry, I've got another meeting that's popping up messages. And I wanted to know how the negotiations will proceed, because somebody, I think it was Simon Keys, asked for Frome Town Council to possibly facilitate a conversation between Friends of the River Frome and the developers. And I've just wondered, personally, I think it would be a good idea before it goes to planning board to be able to say that some sort of deal has been done. And I'm wondering if the Mendip legal team are saying that, well, not playing ball really. I'm just wondering how and who we will get a legal agreement. If it's not a Section 106 agreement, and if it's not in the red line and it's not shown on the map, can we find a way forward, or can both parties make a commitment tonight to find a way forward, or could Frome Town Council offer to facilitate that, or is that not the remit of this meeting? I may be asking for too much of a planning meeting. And
I could just probably respond to you, Helen, very briefly, to say that the parties are in discussion and there's emails being exchanged. So there was a proposal that was discussed and put forward. Friends of Frome have consulted their members and come back with a sort of counter proposal, and that is under consideration. So I can't really say any more, but the parties are directly engaging. So I don't think we necessarily need any outside person to get involved at this stage, in my opinion, but others may have a different view.
I think what I'm trying to say is, in terms of what people have been saying about certainty, it seems to me that if we're asking Friends of the River Frome to withdraw their application from Somerset County Council, you have used the term right of way, it rather interchangeably with putative path and permissive path. And I suppose what I'm trying to see is how we get that path, the alternative path, pinned down in perpetuity, and what kind of legal agreement that would involve. So somebody, Councillor Boyle, I think, suggested whether it could be handed over to a third party, a trust, who then manage it, or whether the land, that tiny strip along the top, could be handed over to Frome Town Council to manage, so that then they will manage it on behalf of the community. Are those kind of ideas on the table? And as I say, I've come into this late, I'm not close to the negotiations, so I don't know if these things have already been discussed.
Well, they're on the table, but I think the broad principles and the route need to be agreed first. I think it's the route which is the sticking point from my observations of the discussions. So if the route can be agreed, then everything else follows. But I think it's, I mean, obviously Frome, there's probably a divergence of views within the Frome River Frome body as well, because they represent a number of people. So, you know, they were split on their views on the first proposal. So, you know, has to be a compromise solution if it's going to happen.
Okay, thank you.
I think so. Paul?
Just a quick follow-up to that. It seems to me, Chris, it isn't just the route that's the problem. It's also the fact that it's secure in perpetuity. It's all very well agreeing a different route if it's a permissive path, but that's completely different from a public right of way, isn't it? So the two go really hand in hand.
I think it could be a public right of way as the permanent solution, but that would only happen if the yellow route was expunged. So you know, from that Somerset process, and then a permanent route would be on that around that upper way. But I think fundamentally the issue is the actual sort of route that's, you know, in the current state of the discussions.
But I mean, I think we're kind of, it's getting into kind of minute detail in a sense, and it seems a legal agreement, I'm no legal expert, but a legal agreement would have to include both a public right of way, a kind of a legal access in perpetuity at the same time as that yellow line was withdrawn.
Yeah.
We couldn't withdraw the yellow line, and
well,
then
you'd have to have some kind of framework, you know, that the parties sign up to that would be legally enforceable. So and then, but also it's related to a transfer of land as well, ownership. So so the whole thing gets wrapped up in one, really. So if it's going to happen, then that's why, from the developer's perspective, they just want this planning permission out the way so they can get into those substantive discussions to see if the compromise can be agreed.
Great. Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions? I know Rich is posting on. Yeah, that was going through my mind as well, Sheila. Yeah.
Do you want me to?
Please do, Jane. Yeah.
Okay, so this is what I'm sensing, and perhaps how we might be responding. The actual development, the building of the houses, the employment units, there's no objection to that. Actually, would go as far as to say that this scheme is perhaps better than the one that has already been approved on the site. The footpath, the one shown in yellow, that is being considered by Somerset County Council, is not within the application red line, and therefore doesn't actually form part of this application. However, the fact that within the design and access statement there is reference to a permissive path that will go through the site that would then go on to link up with that path in the future, or at least access to the riverside. I think the key part of it is that we would want to be satisfied that the Friends of the River Frome residents, users of the yellow footpath, current users of that, would want to be satisfied that they still have a route that gives them access to the riverside, whether there be a formal footpath there or not. So it's going to be a difficult response in as much as trying to separate the fact that we support the development, but actually it's the footpath, not the yellow footpath, the permissive path that goes through the site, as to whether a compromise can be reached between the two parties. And I feel that we would want to be satisfied that Friends of the River Frome and the residents are happy with the arrangements going forward before we would be in a position to be able to support the application, even though we're not objecting to the development itself. Did that make any sense?
Yeah, well done. Yeah. Is there any other comments from councillors on what Jane just said? I'm not going to try and summarise it because I think it's perfect.
I think that was excellent, personally. Well done, Jane.
So I suppose the question is now, how do we get to that stage where we're confident that Friends of the River Frome and the residents are happy with the compromise? What happens next? So, you know, if we as the town council submit our response along those lines, then what happens? And there is there are time constraints here, really.
Yeah.
You know, I think the fact that the appeal is going through for determination, the fact that this application has a certain period within it which it should be determined, and clearly both parties don't want to be left hanging not knowing what's going on. So I'm not quite sure who I'm directing that question to, but what happens now?
Can I? When do we have to give a response by?
So we, as a consultee, have 21 days within which to respond. That's the technical answer, if you like. Very often we are able to submit our comments slightly after that, but I think we need to be careful that we don't leave it too long, otherwise we will miss the opportunity to submit our comments.
Have we got time to talk to Friends of the River Frome and come up with a compromise before we then give an official?
I'm going to look at Steve. I know this looks odd on the screen, but he's sat right next to me. I
I'm
feel I
looking
need
at
to
you,
talk to him.
Yeah, sorry, Jane. I can't look at the screen. Sorry, everybody.
Yeah, we.
Jane's sitting next to me. Yeah.
What I could do is I could contact the planning officer and say to them that we would like some extra time to enable conversations to be held between ourselves, Friends of the River, all parties. They may, however, say that they're not willing to give us an extension of time within which to send our comments. That has happened in the past. You know, if they have a deadline to meet, us delaying our comments means that their deadlines then get delayed as well. So I can't answer that definitively, but we could certainly try.
What I'm trying to do, Chris, is come up with something where we can actually get something reasonably concrete to go back to you and your clients that moves this whole thing forward rather than keeps going around in the sort of perpetual circle that we seem to be in at the moment. That's why I was sort of trying to see how long we had, if we had time to do those discussions.
Yeah, I mean, I think as Jane said, it's at the planning officer's discretion, the timing of the application and how it's determined, whether it's a delegated decision or whether it will be going to committee, so
yeah, no, so,
yeah, I mean, I think the point of me being here today is just to reassure you that there are discussions going on, and I can't say that a deal will be done, but the parties wish to accommodate each other. Well, I think the problem is the applicants are quite clear, what their sort of red lines are, but the Rivers of Frome, naturally, with a broad base of body, there's a differing opinions, so they have more of a problem to probably speak with one voice.
John, did you want to jump in?
Well, I was just wondering if the time is tight, then you know, sometimes you just have to knock heads together in a sense. And I was just wondering if we could propose a sort of like, if town council is going to be involved here in this public forum, I don't think that's the best place to have this discussion. So could we say that we're going to have a sort of, as the town council together, planning committee, we're going to have a sort of Chatham House rules discussion with all the different parties interested quickly, just to see if we can knock up some sort of compromise that will satisfy the different needs at this moment in time. It would be a shame because people are constrained because we are in a public formal forum here, and actually we could have a discussion. There may be a solution there, because I echo what Paul said. It feels like there's something there. There's something there. We just haven't quite got there.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak for the applicants to say that they would be happy to, you know, engage with Frome if Frome Town Council wanted to broker a discussion. Yeah, I'm sure that they would be happy to do that. But I would say that because of where we are with the planning process, you do probably need, I would advise you to put some form of comment over to the planning officer. But separately from that, the applicants, yeah, a sort of Chatham House rules type sort of conversation with the key parties, could be something they would welcome. To sort of unlock the impasse that there is, you know.
Thanks for that, Chris. So I'm just talking to Jane, who's next to me. We normally have to vote at this meeting, don't we, but we can delegate that responsibility to you, myself and Paul as deputy chair.
You can, yes, yeah.
And so I'm just thinking out loud, and this may not fly, so shoot me down, councillors, if you think it's all wrong. What I'm thinking, if we can have a week in which to have conversations with Friends of the River Frome, Chris, your clients as well, and if we can close the gap that we seem to have within a week, then we as a planning committee can then issue our statement delegated to Jane, myself and Paul within that week. I don't know what anyone else feels about that, if that's something that might work. Paul, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, and it wasn't directly in relation to what you just said, Steve. Right. So I don't know whether you want me to wait or.
No, yeah. So
I just really, just out of interest, really, I just wanted to ask Simon a question, and as to whether the discussion this evening has kind of helped at all in kind of clarifying the potential agreement for Friends of the River Frome, or whether it hasn't really moved it forward at all. And is there anything useful that's come out of this discussion that he can take back to his colleagues at Friends of the River Frome?
Thanks for asking the question, Paul. Yes, this has been a very helpful discussion. As I've said at the beginning, I'm not against the development, and we don't want to create, when it's not our aim to create problems for the developer. Our only interest is in securing the access to the riverside as the town council, district council, and the vast numbers of the residents are in agreement on. So a couple of things I'm very pleased to hear about, Chris. Thank you very much for saying that your applicants would be willing to consider a right of way for the alternative route. That's a critical point, I think. And the second is you indicated that the path could return to the riverside along the edge of the red boundary, which is great. So obviously those things we need to confirm properly. One issue is outstanding. I just want to sound a tiny note of caution here, which is that from the point of view of not just Friends of the River Frome, but the people who value that path, giving up this substantial section is of great advantage to the developers. It's a net loss to Frome. So we will be looking at those negotiations to look at how we can actually get some better benefit from the rest of the site to compensate for that loss. But what I would also like to say is I'm really pleased that we're now in dialogue with the applicants, and Friends of the River Frome is available from 9 o'clock tomorrow morning to continue these discussions. And I'd like to thank Chris and the applicants for the situation where we can have this conversation.
Thanks, Simon. Lizzie's great at these sort of things. Come on, Lizzie.
I almost don't want to follow that because that was lovely. That was a really nice sort of conclusion to our conversation. But just one more thing, like Colombo. My only thing would be, because you said, let's do this in a week. I would say, give yourself an extra week. If we've got 21 days, let's use a few more of them, because it may be that in the first week you get a sense of direction and kind of what you agree on and where it's likely to go. But then another week is going to give a bit more time in case there's any kind of legal stuff, complexities, governance models, stewardship type models that you want to really dig into.
We've got until the 6th.
Oh, there you go then. Do it in a week.
Got until the 6th?
Yeah, I mean, I've just checked on the Mendip's website. The expiry for the consultation deadline is the 6th of July. I would hope that there is a good week's leeway in that. So yes, I think we could take a couple of weeks, I suppose.
Take approximately 11 days then.
Yeah, I mean, I'm if it helps, I'm happy to speak to Carlton Langford myself and say, let's facilitate a discussion, if that's what it takes, so, but it is at his discretion.
Yeah, I mean, I think if that comes from you, then I hopefully that would make a difference, because if an application goes over time, then the planners have to ask you to agree to an extension of time before they determine your application. So if you show the willingness that you're happy with that, then I can't see why they wouldn't be. So that would be good.
I do reiterate, I think it would be sensible for you to put at least some holding comments on the table, so at least he's got something. So yeah.
What are we voting on then now? We're not.
No, I mean
we're going to facilitate discussions.
I will send a response, just suggesting, a holding response as suggested, saying that we would like some time to enable discussions between both parties that we would be involved in, and then we will agree our formal response after those discussions have taken place. Great.
Thank you. Is everybody virtually happy with that? Thank you, Rich. Great. Okay. Well, look, let's really work to see if we can't sort this out. Chris, thank you very much for your time and answering questions. It is really helpful when people like yourself join these meetings. We always find that we make steps forward. So thank you very much for that. Simon, equally, thank you for coming along and your points as well. And between us all, we'll be in contact and hopefully we can get something sorted out.
And I'll just say thank you very much for the time and care you've given us.
That's quite all right. Thank you. Great. Thanks, everybody. Chris, you don't have to stay for the rest of this.
No, I will go if you don't mind. But thanks very much, all. Okay, thanks. All right. Cheers.
Thank you. Thanks, Simon. Right. Moving on, Jane.
Well, that was the first application of about 30 on the list.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I always forget to do this, so I will clarify for those people who may be watching the live stream or watching the recording at a later point. Councillors have all looked at the plans in advance of this meeting online, and can, there's John, and can continue to look at the plans online throughout the meeting, and I can share plans if necessary. So if you wonder why nobody's looking at the plans, it's because that has happened already. So the next application on our list that has been highlighted for discussion is number 589, and the address is Greenhill Grange, Catherston Close, and this is an application to fell a horse chestnut that is covered by a tree protection order. The reason that is stated on the application form for the tree to be felled is that the managers, Green Hill Grange is a care home, and the managers are concerned that some residents may try to consume the conkers. The manager has agreed to replace the conker tree with a flowering cherry for the residents to enjoy. There is also concern that during the autumn, residents often use the garden to take exercise, and the tree overhangs the path and presents an increased risk of falls, despite the home's efforts to keep the paths clear and safe. So the comment that I put in my notes was actually that I don't believe that those reasons justify the felling of this tree. But that is my view, and welcome to hear the views of councillors.
Does anyone not agree with that? It's probably the easiest place to start. Rich.
Sorry, what I've done.
Just
use the microphone that you've got there.
Sorry, yeah, my comments were stronger than I'm sure that there will be concerns about residents doing what they shouldn't do, but I wonder what the residents actually thought about it, what the residents actually thought about this, and whether they were being consulted at all. But basically, it's a TPO tree. It looks from the photographs as though it's in pretty good nick. It's not at the centre of the site. It seems it seems a totally ridiculous reason to get rid of a really nice tree.
thanks, Rich. Yeah. Any other comments from anybody? No, I think we object, Jane.
Okay.
Based
Based on the grounds that we don't believe that this is sufficient justification for felling of a protected tree. So somebody will need to
Thanks,
propose.
Rich. Propose it. Thank you, Sheila, for seconding it. And, right.
And that's unanimous.
Apart from John. John.
Yeah,
Thanks, John.
he's there. Thank you. Yeah, that's unanimous. Okay. So the next application that has been highlighted for discussion is number 597 on our list, and it's 8 Charles Road. And it's for the erection of a 2-storey side extension. You will have seen on Mendip's website that concern has been raised by the neighbours about the loss of light that they happen as a result of the extension, which without actually looking on site is, hard to say with any, I can't say that definitely, but from looking at it on the plan, I would agree that those concerns are justified. And also, this is something that we have talked about before, but perhaps more on the sort of historic buildings, but there's no drop in the roof line to distinguish the extension from the main house. And you'll see that I did actually put a link into Mendip's house extension design guide, which just demonstrates that as good practice. But you may not feel that that's an issue on this application, but I believe that the overlooking is a potential issue on this one.
Okay. Thank you, John.
Could you just remind me of the number of this one? I've missed that.
597, John.
Okay, great. Thank you.
8 Charles Road. Any comments from any? Paul?
Yeah, I agree that I think it's overbearing and it's what did I say? I've got, yeah, imposing and insensitive to the neighbour. That was it. I agree with that. I'm not so sure about the need for the ridge to drop down, I'm not quite so concerned about that, but I think it's insensitive to the neighbour. So we probably should object on that basis.
Any other thoughts? Sorry, Lizzie.
That's all right, don't worry. I agree with what's been said thus far. And there is, from what I can tell, there's already a garage there. So that might suggest that a single story wouldn't present these problems, and it's the kind of overwhelmingness of a second or two-story extension. So maybe that's something that they might want to consider instead. But yeah, I think it's just too much, and I'd kind of be with the neighbours with their concerns.
Does anyone else? No. Great. What we got, Jane?
Okay, in that case, we have got an objection. And the objection is that the extension will be overbearing and there are concerns about the overlooking of the neighbouring properties. I don't think we need to say more than that, really.
No, indeed. Could someone propose that, please? Got John and someone second it. I've got Paul, and all those in favour of that?
And that's unanimous, thank you. Right, so the next application, sorry, bear with me. There's so many pages, it takes me a while to go through the list. Sorry? Yes, so number 600 on our list, and the address is 5 Laburnum Close. This is an application for a loft conversion with front and rear dormers. Again, I know I think there is to the rear of the site with the dormer windows, which are obviously very high in the roof line, that there will be overlooking into the gardens of the neighbouring properties. Maybe not directly into habitable rooms, but I do think there certainly will be overlooking to, as I say, the rear gardens. And the Civic Society did make a comment about it. If you just bear with me, I will. The Civic Society said that the height of the dormer extension should be subsidiary to that of the main roof. The height proposed here means that the extension will create a lump on the existing roof rather than being incorporated with it. The mass and orientation of the extension are likely to cause afternoon shading of the garden of the adjoining properties.
The neighbours objected, they haven't, have they, on this one?
John had his hand up.
No, my question is just about neighbours' objections to it.
There certainly weren't any posted when I looked.
Because essentially they're trying to make the top of the house usable.
Yeah.
Thanks, John. Helen, I see you wanted to say something.
Thanks all. I actually haven't looked at this because it's not in my ward, but it sounds very similar to the last one, but it's inappropriate massing, and it's too bulky, and it's going to be imposing, overshadowing, all that sort of thing. At the last meeting, planning board meeting, there was one in Colford, very similar. It was the back garden was west facing, so it would have taken light out from the south to have built upwards and outwards more, and the neighbours did not say anything. And somebody at the meeting said, well, the neighbours have not said anything, so why should we be bothering about this? Why, we should just let it through. And my view is, and we got this when we did our first planning training, is that we have to think beyond that, 20 years or 50 years hence, when those neighbours have all moved on and died, and whether or not it's going to be something that someone can live in in the future. So even if the neighbours haven't commented, it could be that they're disabled or old or don't know how to. I've had people with Caxton Road coming back and saying to me, but I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to contribute a comment. So they just might not know how to do it. So we have to be there for those neighbours that aren't commenting. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Helen. Good point. Lizzie.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Thank you, Helen. With this one, actually, I didn't really have a problem with it because the neighbours, it's out the back and it's some distance down through the back gardens, and it's a kind of stick a box on a roof sort of approach, rather than the big hefty side extension, which would really have been kind of getting very close to a neighbouring house. This one doesn't have a neighbour. It's a semi-detached. It's got, so it doesn't have a neighbour on the other side that it would interfere with. So this one feels more like the one of, oh gosh, Beechwood, that is also in this week's one, where it's about overlooking across green spaces, overlooking across gardens. I was kind of okay.
Okay, thank you. Paul?
I was going to say something quite similar, actually. I'm not quite sure that I didn't object to this one, really for the same reasons that Lizzie's just outlined. I think I can see that potentially there might be a little bit of additional shading in the afternoon from the west, but inevitably there will be some overlooking into the garden. I'm not sure I agree with the Civic Society about the need to drop the dormers, because they are they're kind of nominally subservient to the main roof, but it's very nominal. My feeling is that the judgment on this about overlooking and shading, etc., can really only be made by a planning officer on visiting the site. It's really difficult to tell from a drawing.
That was going to be my suggested response.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. Yeah, I knew that. Yeah, I think absolutely right, Paul. Yeah, I don't think we've really got any objection, but let's see what the case officer assesses. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we can raise the fact that there may be a potential for it, and ask the case officer if they would assess that when they're on site.
Just Rich.
Just a thought. I mean, is there any structural reason why you couldn't move that whole space forward a bit so the back and the front were equal? Is there a structural reason why that can't be done?
No.
I mean, it might be something. I can't see anything immediately, but it might be to do with where the stairs come up or something like that. But there's probably not any particular reason, really, apart from the fact that dormer windows are probably slightly less acceptable on the front of elevation than they are on the rear elevation.
Okay.
So somebody want to propose the?
Yeah. Shall we go with what Jane said? No objection, but wait for the case officer.
Yeah, I think.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah. Thank you, Rich. All those in favour? Great.
That's unanimous. Thank you.
Next on the list.
Next on the list
Superb.
is. Myself in the muddle now.
603 and 604.
603 and 604. Yeah. Okay, so this is 24 Keyford Froome, which some of you may know better as
the Crown.
The Crown. See, obviously, that's not me. The Crown in Keyford, and the application is for the internal refurbishment of the ground floor, installation of conservation roof lights in a single-storey rear extension, a first floor reinstated as a bed and breakfast accommodation and function room, and the second floor retained as landlord's accommodation. So there are actually two applications, a full application and a listed building application. And you will have seen the photographs that were submitted as part of the application showing the internal condition, and I think this is a case where you can only really make those assessments about the impacts that those works might have when you're actually inside the building, and I have a proper look at it. My view is that the proposed alterations will actually enable a much better use of the building, hopefully bring it into more use through having a function room and B&B and with the landlord's accommodation on site as well. And really, I would suggest that this is one where the conservation officer, we will take their comments, because we don't have access to the building, and we can't inspect all of those particular things. So that would be my suggestion in response to this.
Thanks, Jane. I think it's commendable that someone's looking to bring a pub back into use in the current climate. I think we should. I'm all for it, I have to admit. Any other comments? Oh, you can't comment. Rich?
I know the developer and the designer, so I shouldn't comment, but I'm all for refurbishing pubs like this.
Yeah.
I know that I think there were some local residents a bit worried about it. James, right, if the conservation officer is happy with what's being done, then personally I think it's a good thing.
Yeah.
I was talking to the developer and said that they were only using a quarter of the building before, so it's going to open up various uses.
Great.
I think that's probably a good thing. But I did.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Lizzie?
Rich was very, very quiet then, but I think I'm agreeing with him that this is a good thing. It is, as Steve said, it's really good to see someone wanting to bring the pub back to life, and also to invest in Frome, but not necessarily in the town centre of Frome. Town centre gets a lot of attention, and it's great to see a neighbourhood pub coming back to life. I always jump ahead from planning to building regulations. So this is probably a building regulations thing, but just any noise impacts from the first floor function room on the neighbours, is that building regulations?
So it would be a planning consideration, and for applications with slightly more than a function room, they would be asked to submit a noise impact assessment, but they don't appear to have been asked to submit that. So that it may be that there's an assumption that there won't be that much noise from the function room, but you're right, potentially, if they were going to be using it for music or anything like that, then that is a possibility. Building regs would, unless the issue of noise was raised, building regs would not necessarily look at it from a noise point of view, more of the construction and thermal property and that kind of thing. But no, I must admit, noise wasn't something that I had actually considered as part of the function room. So
maybe it's just one of those things that if you live next door to a pub that's been a pub for a tremendously long time, that's just part of the territory. Yeah. Okay.
Great. Thanks, Lizzie. Any other comments? No. So I think no objections.
I mean, is it a no objection, or given the comments that I've heard from councillors, is it something that we would actually want to support, actively support, as long as the conservation officer was happy that the alterations didn't impact? I see some thumbs up. Does somebody like to?
Yep. Someone like to propose that, please? Thanks, John. Someone second it. Thanks, Sheila. Mark can't vote.
So that's unanimous from those. I think you need to do abstentions if.
Oh.
Yeah.
Abstentions. Mark.
Sorry.
Am I abstaining?
Are you abstaining? Are you abstaining?
Yes, you are, because you're not able to vote. Yeah.
I would be obviously voting in favour.
Yeah. Okay. The decision is carried unanimously. Not sorry, by majority.
By majority, then.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Technical tools to vote for
that. Okay. So The next application is number 605 on our list, and it's 8 Laystone Close. This is the application for the erection of a 2-bedroomed house with associated works and a new dropped curb. The applicants had got some pre-application advice from Mendip District Council planners on this application, and their view on it was that with careful design, a scheme could be proposed that would not harm the residential amenity of the neighbouring occupiers, and that the site has enough space to ensure that there is private amenity space for both the existing and the proposed dwelling, but that would need to be clearly shown on the plans. Having looked at it again, I think this is one where there is a potential for some loss of light or overshadowing to the neighbouring property. But as we said before, you know, that's not really something that can be properly assessed unless you're on site. And I believe the Civic Society had some comments, which I will just find. So they were concerned that this is the overdevelopment of the site and the creation of a substandard dwelling. They're saying that it doesn't actually meet the minimum space standards for a two-bedroomed, three bed space, 2-story dwelling. And that it should be a minimum of 79 square meters. They feel that it's a narrow plot and it provides less than an optimum layout for living space. And essentially they're saying that the proposal is to squeeze in a house that looks stuck on as an afterthought, not the subservient but contemporary design, which responds positively and creatively to its context. And there's a bit more, but you know, I think you get the gist of it. So it's whether or not we feel that it is too small, or whether it uses up too much of the existing land that goes with the property, and whether there's any potential for it to be overlooking or overbearing in this case.
Okay. Paul.
My first, I've got a few comments, but my first thing is a question really for Jane. It does appear to be under space standards. Is that something that is at the discretion of the planning officer to allow a dwelling to be developed under space standards, or is it kind of an automatic refusal? It is under. Yeah. So it's possible that they could pass this, even though I thought that was probably the case. So I mean, beyond that, I mean, I'm not so sure that it's necessarily substandard, but it's possibly a precedent which people were concerned about. If the planning allows dwellings under space standards to have planning, then it just opens up a kind of potential can of worms with other people applying, you know, big developers, etc. So that's one thing. The other comments were my normal ones. Use of plastic windows, don't like that. It said in the design and access statement they have space for cycles. I didn't see that in any plans. And the big one really for me is the fact that the existing front garden is completely trashed to make a car park, which seems a real shame. You would end up with, you know, a car park in front of both dwellings. Other than that, I don't have a problem with it really. So.
Thanks, Paul. Any other comments, Rich?
I'd said something like, I don't like it, but I don't like it either. So yeah, for all the reasons that Paul just said, I don't like, but equally find anything specific to objects. Yeah. I didn't realise about the size thing.
Yeah, thanks. Any other comments from anybody? Lizzie?
This is a broader point, I think, beyond this one, and there are several today which were in this meeting, which were people wanting to build what looked like self-contained dwellings, and we don't know for what purpose. And we've had discussions before about annexes and the difference between an annex and a self-contained dwelling and the different types of planning permission. And actually this one appears to be, yeah, we're building a house.
Yeah.
And great, and it's upfront and we're building a house. So thank you for being upfront about it, rather than trying to sneak it through as some sort of annex, which sometimes it feels like we're pushed down that route. I quite liked the energy and sustainability statement on this one. I was going to give that one a thumbs up, and the incorporation of renewable heat technology, solar PV, all those nice sorts of things. But that broader point about kind of the reasons for people building, and it may be a bigger conversation to have at another meeting about, if you start to say, okay, you can build one on your house, and you look at an estate like Packsaddle where you've got actually quite a lot of open space and space between properties, and big gardens, and do we suddenly end up with everybody building a little house next door? And actually, is that a problem, given that we've got quite a dramatic housing shortage? And it might be that this frees up some land that people don't value in the same way that they value some of the other spaces that have been discussed recently for development. So bigger conversation another day, but I thought I'd say it.
Thanks, Lily. Yeah, very good point, actually. Any other questions or comments? No. So there's no real objection, is there?
No.
I mean, there's a few personal tastes. We don't like a few things, but at the end of the day, there's nothing really there to actually object to. Would that be a fair?
I think that's a fair assumption. Well, we could certainly make reference to the fact that there should be provision for cycle storage, and that we regret the loss of the front garden, but still there's no objection. And just in response to what Lizzie was saying, actually this yes, it's clear that this is a separate dwelling that they want to build, but actually it's probably similar in size to quite a few of the two-story side extensions that we have seen. So yeah, well, your point is, I take your point.
Great. Paul, sorry.
Do we also need to add a comment just to refer to the kind of planning officer to check on his site visit that it doesn't have a kind of an impact, a negative impact on the neighbour as well?
Yes, yeah. I'll add that in.
Thanks. Do you want to read?
Yes, so that would be no objection. However, there should be provision for the provision should be made for cycle storage. We regret the loss of the front gardens and would ask that the case officer checks that whether there are any overlooking or overshadowing impacts whilst on site.
Great, thank you. Someone propose that, please. Thank you, Paul. Seconded by Rich.
And that's unanimous. Thank you. Next on the list is number 615, and it's 21 Staunton View. And this is for the erection of a one-bedroomed dwelling house. So there's previously, or there is already a single-story side extension attached to the property, and the intention is to demolish the extension and build a two-story. Well, but it's a two-story extension that will be a dwelling house. And no, actually, that's not right. Sorry, it's not two, it is single story, but there will be space in the roof. So the bedroom will be in the roof space. So it will look like a single story, but effectively we'll have 2 stories. And this one I think this is perhaps one of the ones that Lizzie might have been referring to. It's not actually clear whether it is intended to be sold as a separate dwelling or whether it is an annex for parents or relative or something like that. It doesn't make reference to that in the application. So without clarification, I think we would have to assume that it is going to be a separate dwelling house. And I think given that it won't be any higher than the existing extension that is there, albeit on a slightly bigger footprint, there won't be any impacts on the neighbours in terms of overlooking or overbearing.
Thanks. Any comments, Rich?
On the drawings, it does call it a new house on the elevations. I don't think I have any objections to this.
Paul?
I don't remember seeing the Civic Society comment on this, but it appears to be challenging space standards again. Yeah, I mean, actually, to me, it appears to be even more challenging, but it might be just that the drawings aren't quite so clear. But
the Civic Society have made reference to that as well.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's the only thing I think that I would raise on this.
It's just very similar to the previous one, isn't it?
It is, yeah, yeah. I mean, I recall that we had an application a while back where somebody wanted to convert their garage, albeit quite a big garage, and we mentioned space standards at that point, and actually it was the intention of the applicants, when they retired or whatever it was, that they move into that smaller dwelling, and then either sell their main house or relatives moved into it. But they felt that it was their choice to want to live in a property of that size, so why shouldn't they? But yes, I mean, there are obviously space standards in place for a reason, but they're not, I don't believe they form part of Mendip's policy that houses have to meet that standard. And there are, we've all heard of the tiny homes movement, so there is acceptance that people can live in smaller houses if they wish to.
Great, thanks. So again, I don't think we have any objection per se on this. It's just.
No, I just raised it for discussion really, because it was similar to the previous one. So no objection if everybody's happy with that.
Yep. We go on that, I guess. I'll propose that. Sheila's seconded and everyone's voted.
That's unanimous as well. Thank you. Right. Now there was one more that I had intended to raise for discussion, but don't appear to have highlighted, which is really, really helpful.
Well, there was a comment on the Wittox Lane. It wasn't mainly procedural thing that the Civic Society have prepared the heritage statement, wasn't there?
There was. That wasn't the one I was looking for,
right.
But we can discuss.
Well, no, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Mark, do you want to?
Yeah, as it's my ward, I have a look at it. I look at all of them, of course, but as it's what I walk by every day. So 11 Wittox Lane, yeah, I have no problem with the development at the back. I'm just a bit alarmed to see that the heritage statement is written by the chair of the Civic Society. So we have an application supported by Dr. Smith, and then no objections from the Civic Society chaired by Dr. Smith. I'm sure it's perfectly adequate, inoffensive, and all above board. I just find it's a bit of a conflict of interest. I'm sure they're not governed by the same rules that we are, but we would have to declare an interest in this case, and it hasn't been done here. So I just wanted to flag that up because it could be perceived as such.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Paul?
I just wanted to, I think I'm right in saying the difference is that the Civic Society aren't a statutory consultee. So in a sense, the planning officer is much freer to kind of ignore what they say anyway, probably.
I agree, but if you have the same name on two statements, it looks like it has the support and approval of one of the other organisations. So that was, I know they're not statutory, and but that's how it looks to me.
No, thanks for that, Mark. Into the group. Jane, you found your
I have, thank you, yes. So this is number 593 on our list, and it's 98 Vallis Road. Just really raising this for consistency's sake, really. So it's for the erection of an extension to form access to the second floor, form a porch and change a window to the rear. So whilst I actually don't think there's any issues with the extension in terms of any impacts that it might have on neighbouring properties. It looks, so within the extension will be a staircase which will enable access to each floor independently. And looking at the floor plans of the rooms on those separate floors, it does look as though you know, they could be occupied independently. They all have bathrooms, not what I would say a full kitchen necessarily, but it might lend itself to some kind of you know, letting Airbnb or something similar, or you know, they could be rented separately. I'm not saying that's a problem. You know, I just wanted to flag that up and see if you had any issues with it.
It's very similar to the previous ones.
It is, yeah.
About,
yeah.
So, yeah. I don't think there's any objections from anybody that's come through. I think, as Jane said, just for consistency, you know, for members of the public, we should make note that we've actually looked at it and to it accordingly. So everyone's happy with that. Right, Lizzie.
Sorry, me again. Jane, just to check, did they, in their application, is it it's described as an extension and internal refurb, not as creation of a new dwelling or subdividing?
No,
okay.
just as an extension with access to the second floor. And I couldn't see anything in there that implied that it wasn't for their own personal use. But
do we want to clarify that or put anything on that at all?
Well, I mean, I don't know whether or not whether there is a problem or any implications of it becoming used in that way, which I guess is why, you know, I was just running it by you to see whether you felt that might be an issue. You know, on the one hand, you could say it's a family home, but on the other, you know, might be attracting visitors and so on to the town, providing employment and places to stay. So, yeah, maybe it's a debate I shouldn't have started.
John.
I don't see any problem, and it's difficult to construe what people are doing things for. So
we'll go with that as our response.
Yeah, I was going to say I don't have a problem even if they want to divide that off into a separate flat or something. And I just kind of wanted to also commend perhaps the fact that they are upgrading the building thermally. They're insulating the that kind of stairwell, which is a positive impact hopefully on the building.
No other comments? So no objection on that one as well.
Yep.
Is there anything else that we need to talk about? It was one of those rhetorical questions. Great. In which case, can we just vote that we have no objection on all of the others, please? Oh, no.
No, I mean it wasn't a serious thing. It was just I just wanted to mention application. I've lost it now. Oh, 598. No, it wasn't 598. Sorry, it was. I had it. I just looked. Oh yeah, 592, which I think was Linfield Road. It's an application to change a flat roof porch into a kind of a mono pitch or lean-to porch, and I couldn't really see why they want to do it, because everything else. I did go on Google Street View, and I noticed that has been done elsewhere. I think one other dwelling has done that, but they seem to have built a bit of an extension. But I, as far as I could tell, I did look at it quite quickly, but it just seems to be interrupting the kind of. I mean, not that these houses are particularly significant architecturally, but they there is a flow to them. You know, they're consistent with their flat roof porches and etc. And why somebody would want to just interrupt that for no particular reason. But I mean, it's not something that we necessarily need to comment on.
How about variety?
Or it leaks, one or the other.
Yeah, but I think that might be the reason.
Okay, thanks for that, Paul. Can we just vote on the fact that there's no objections to any of the other applications that we've all looked at, please? If someone could propose that for me. Thank you, Mark. Seconded by Rich. If everyone's in favour.
And that's unanimous, thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you, Jane. Hannah, when's the next meeting? 15th of July. Right, I think that's it. Thanks very much. The next meeting is on the 15th of July. Thank you all. And yeah, we'll be in touch. Goodbye.